you're new here, so let me share a piece of wisdom. Lorca isn't interested in what you are. He's interested in what you can do for him. Hello there, we're talking about the ray of sunshine that is Commander Ellen Landry. Specifically in this episode, I'm going to be comparing, passively at least, the two versions of Landry that we encounter, of course, because we encounter Commander Landry from the USS Discovery and Commander Landry from the, well, ISS Buran, I suppose, and who exactly these two people are. And an interesting thing I've noticed, I am a big fan of the Mirror Universe. As I have often pointed out, if you can actually see that, a big Mirror Universe fanboy here. And yeah, it's not as simple as Rom would discover when his journeys into the Mirror Universe as to say that everyone that's in the Mirror Universe is literally the mirror of themselves. It's a ridiculous misnomer to assume that everyone in both universes is completely opposite to each other. In fact, most people seem to be very similar. In fact, I would go as far as to say that most alien species, on the whole, prior to probably contact with Terrans, are pretty much the same as in the Prime Universe. I think the point of divergence is in Terran history, not in, say, Vulcan or Klingon, although there do seem to be differences with those races. I think those are all post-contact with the Terrans. And the Terran Empire had a massive influence on the region of space. And as a result, you see a lot of knock-on effect differences in that universe. It's darker, it's more aggressive. The Terrans are a different race in culture and everything to the humans of the Prime Universe, but at some points, as we do know, there was a divergence. It's basically how the reality was created. There was a point where there weren't two separate realities, and then something happened where the Terrans went one way and the Federation humans went the other. But that doesn't mean that every Terran and every Prime Universe human is different. I covered Jennifer Sisko in a previous episode and discovered that the two versions of her were actually very, very similar. The Mirror Universe version was a little more manipulative, yes, but she was basically the same person. Very maternal, very loving, very caring, a brilliant scientist. Basically a very, very similar person in both universes. Whereas many other characters, Kirk for example, are shockingly different in both universes. One is honourable and an explorer and a scientist first, and the other one is a warrior, a soldier, a military commander, and a ruthless dictator. Both are very good at their respective jobs, so in that regard I suppose they're similar. But otherwise, the cultures are very different, but again, it doesn't mean everyone is. And that's where I want Landry. Like Jennifer Sisko, Landry seems to be very similar in both universes. As for my little quote at the beginning, basically, she's a kind of a bitch. In both universes. I think the Terran one's a little more. Yeah, she's a lot more actually. She's like her on steroids. She's a much more vicious version, yes. But I think given the chance, Commander Landry from the USS Discovery would have actually been quite happy in the Terran universe. And I think Lorca recognised that, which is why he kept her around. It wasn't just that he recognised her in his own universe, she was similar. She thought more like a soldier, less like a Starfleet officer. She was, as many were, kind of dismissive of Michael Burnham. That's understandable considering her mutineer status. But the harshness of her approach to everything, she worked her crew and her employees, or security team should I say, more like soldiers than security personnel and scientists. She took her job extremely seriously, which is commendable, but at the same time she was very vicious, particularly towards the tardigrade, which would ultimately kill her, a creature she nicknamed Ripper, that would ultimately rip her apart. There is every pun intended and not lost on me there. But she tried to subdue this creature and failed, wouldn't listen to advice, and was very intransigent and belligerent as a person. It ultimately killed her, and that was the end of her. But let's flick to the Mirror Universe version. The Mirror Universe version of her is actually very similar, but she displays the same level of loyalty to her commanding officer, just like her Prime Universe version. That the Terran one is almost surprising, but again, I often say that underestimating Terrans and assuming they're all backstabbing, treacherous, manipulative sons of is probably inaccurate, because no society could truly function that way and not become an empire. Landry had a great deal of potential in this empire, but she decided to side with Lorca, both out of loyalty towards him, but also over genuine belief that he would make a better leader of the empire than Georgiou. Whether she was manipulated into this belief or she genuinely believed it doesn't really matter. She was fanatically loyal. She may have served aboard the ISS Discovery or the ISS Baran or some other ship. It's not entirely clear. But she survived his coup after he was thrown into the Prime Universe. She was arrested and then thrown into agony booths for the Emperor's entertainment aboard the ISS Sharon. She would eventually be released when Lorca returned and immediately fall back into his services, but there's something to be said for her character and force of will. She'd been in an agony booth and tortured by Starfleet for quite a while, but in typical Terran fashion she got straight up, put on her boots, picked up her phaser and instantly went back for, well, probably revenge, but also to follow her commander back into battle. She would ultimately end up in a fight with Michael Burnham, be knocked unconscious, and she was killed when the Sharon was destroyed. So she died at roughly the same sort of time, within a few months of her Prime Universe counterpart, and we don't know much else about their respective lives. If she had children or anything, unlike her Prime Universe, she may or may not have done. It's not entirely clear. We do see a slightly divergent timeline in the Mirror Universe for a blink and you'll miss it moment almost, where Georgiou is returned and she's then killed by Michael Burnham of the Mirror Universe as she sells out the rebellion, and she's actually a serving officer in that time aboard the ISS Discovery. So it's reasonable to conclude she may have served aboard the Discovery during the coup, but whether or not she was still aboard it when she was captured isn't clear. And this is what I mean by they're very similar people. They both display a lot of loyalty. They're both in the same profession, where sometimes we see people in different universes doing different things. They're both security or military personnel. They serve aboard probably the same ships. They serve the same commanders. And again, in terms of personality, are very direct, very abrasive, very aggressive people who are extremely focused on their duty and on the task at hand and jobs that they need to do. Meaning they're both exceptional officers and fighters, but are very similar people, which again, I fall back on. It doesn't mean different universes, different people, necessarily, because the Terran universe and the Prime universe are very similar. And this is another example of an individual being surprisingly similar to her counterpart. But I will say some of the differences I can see in the characters is, of course, the Mirror Universe version is infinitely more vicious. But I could easily believe that Prime Landry was also pretty vicious. We do see her being quite volatile and aggressive. And it's good to see that the humans of the Prime Universe still have, like a bit of aggression in them, because it's something you often don't see in that universe. And I'm not saying aggression is a good thing, but when you're dealing with races like Klingons and Romulans and Cardassians, sometimes a bit of aggression might save the species. But we didn't get to see much of Landry before she was unfortunately killed, and I can only assume that she wasn't a murderous, treacherous monster like her Terran counterpart effectively turned out to be, because I don't believe Lorca really would have made a better emperor of the Terran Empire than Georgiou. He was going to be the same, but different, most likely. Georgiou appeared to be controlling the Empire perfectly fine, but he developed something of a cult of personality around himself, which she fell into, as did her Prime Universe counterpart. But let me know what you guys think. Do you think that maybe the Prime Universe version was actually considerably better and a much more decent officer, but her exposure to a soldier like Lorca, and basically a Terran, he sort of guided her to become more like the Landry he knew? Or was she always that way? But there must have been a spark of it in her, because she's already an adult, and twisting an adult to become a more vicious person isn't an easy thing to do. And of course, out of universe, just to say, she was played by the amazing Rocco Sharma, who was in Battlestar Galactica as well as Tori, and she played a fantastic role in that, and quite frankly, everything I see her in, always a delight, always a joy, fantastic. And it was great to see her return, actually, as the Mirror Universe version of Landry, and because those episodes, I would love to see an entire series just set in the Mirror Universe. No, none of these crossovers, no reflections and comparisons to the Prime Universe. Just give me a brand new ship, which we haven't seen in the Prime Universe. I don't know, the ISS Courageous or something, and give me an entirely new crew and just set them out doing something. That I would love to see. But yeah, absolutely fantastic, quite compelling character, because she's a rare example that we see where the mirror universe version isn't completely different and isn't just the polar opposite of the prime universe counterpart. Again, going back to what Rom encountered when he moved into the mirror universe momentarily, he assumed that, you know, maybe the mirror universe would be worse versions of everyone at first, and it's like, oh no, that's not the case. They're opposites. When he encounters Brunt is really camp and friendly and nice and makes him food, but then he encounters people like who are just different but not opposite. It just confuses the hell out of him, and I think his confusion is a result of how people refer to the mirror universe in the prime universe, calling it mirror, implying that it's a reflection, that it's an opposite. Left becomes right, up becomes down kind of thing. But that's not the case at all. But put your thoughts in the comment section below, like, share and subscribe if you enjoyed this episode, and bye bye.